Okay, thank you, Karen. As she mentioned, I'm Douglas Montgomery. I'm CEO of Global Connects Media. I'm also executive producer of Global Stage Hollywood, a film festival that we do every November in Hollywood. Just so you know, as far as anime goes, we did a world premiere of Make a Girl this year at the festival, and last year we did a world premiere of Paradox Live. So for those of you who have a world premiere for 2025, call me, we're ready. Also, I'm Asia Market Advisor for Parrot Analytics. I'm an adjunct professor at Temple University, Japan. And most important, I'm actually husband and father of my family who are over here in the corner who have to put up with me. So thank you to them. I'm excited to be here today at the FCCJ. So I'd like to thank the FCCJ for this. And in particular, Saikawa-san, who's here somewhere. She's been very patient with me as we've gone through this. But I'm even more excited to be with Macoto Tezka again. This is probably the third or fourth time we've been with Tezuka-san. As I mentioned, we do a film festival in LA, and our actual very first event in 2019 was with Tezuka-san, and we had an event at Japan House in Los Angeles called The Birth of Astro Boy, and we talked about the beginnings of anime. That was 5 years ago, before this word called COVID, which nobody knew at the time. So many things have changed, but one thing that has changed in a positive way for Japan is the growth of anime since 2019, and we will talk about that. All right, so I will run through the deck, and then we will also have Tezuka-san speak, and then after that, we will have some time for questions. Okay, so we already mentioned this. So actually, in the spring of this year, we did a couple of visits to the Japanese government. We had one meeting with Kante, so the cabinet office, and we had another meeting with the Ministry of Interior, the Somusho, and we talked about the potential of anime, and we also talked about data. So on this slide, on the left-hand side, you see this white paper with tiny Times New Roman font, which is the cover of a 65-page, really boring PDF. So, Merry Christmas, everybody. I read it, so you don't have to. But the important points I'll bring up here. Number one, Japanese government has identified the enormous increase in popularity of Japanese content around the world. Second of all, they have identified the content industry as one to invest in and one of strategic importance, and they estimate it at a scale of 4.7 trillion yen. And again, I've converted this, so you don't have to. That's roughly $31 billion, which rivals the steel industry and is approaching the value of semiconductors. And for anybody here who has a phone or a connected TV or a PC, just remember that semiconductor is pretty boring to look at. Without content that will be run off that semiconductor, there's really nothing to watch. So, again, maybe we are biased, but the content is really the important part of that relationship between hardware and software, in my opinion. Third, the Japanese government also identifies film tourism as extremely important, and they call it a significant ripple effect. We'll get into ripple effects a little bit later on. And fourth, on a slide that didn't make the final version, but there is a slide, there is a point in the new Cool Japan strategy where they talk about the target, the upcoming target of 20 trillion yen. This is Japanese government's target for content by 2033, 20 trillion yen, which is roughly $120 billion. And there's a midpoint in 2028 of 10 trillion yen, roughly $62 billion. In both instances, the Japanese government identifies the need to have sophisticated data techniques in order to track, measure, and target areas to reach these numbers. So what we're going to talk a little bit about today is my partner, Parrot Analytics, and the sophisticated data methods that they use and that we've actually used to come up with today's presentation. So this fancy page actually represents how consumers are interacting with content. And this is actually how Parrot comes up with what they call demand metrics. And demand metrics are simply, Parrot is the leader in global entertainment analytics, and they have a system that captures how much attention, engagement, desire, and viewership is expressed by consumers. How consumers express this is actually represented on the screen here. Google searches, Facebook likes, Facebook interactions, Wikipedia interactions, etc. What Parrot will do is they collect billions of data points daily, put it in a data warehouse, and they attribute it, and they also give it a ranking or a weighting. The importance of the weighting can get very complicated. Should somebody wish to speak to us a little bit later, that is fine. But the easy way to think about it is the more effort required by a consumer to engage in content, the heavier the weighting. So something like a Facebook like, which is very easy, very quick, that is a very low weighting, but something, a point where two consumers are talking about a piece of content, writing a blog post, that kind of thing, has a much heavier weighting. So Parrot will take all this data, they put a weight against it, and they come up with a demand metric. This demand metric has been empirically proven to be statistically valid. Again, this gets a little bit data geeky, but statistically valid to an R squared of 90% towards streaming new subscribers and retention. If you have that metric, you can apply it against the dollar figures that these streamers publish, and that's actually how you can come up with the global streaming revenue applied to anime. Again, we can break this down by title, by genres, by talent, etc. And also can be separated many different ways. Anyway, regardless, this is how it's done. So, on the big picture scale, we are in a moment now which can be called peak Asia. This chart here shows the global streaming revenue share of non-English language content, so any content that's not in English, around the world from 2021 to 2024. What you can see is that Japan has the highest share by far of non-English content around the world. As we all know, Japan does not have the highest population in the world, but the content is really strong. This is a very, very positive thing for Japan, and this is why the government wants to invest in this area. You can see Korea at number 2. Korea's been hitting a lot of headlines over the years with the K-dramas, often powered by K-pop. However, the Japanese number is much higher. Again, we can go into very complicated analysis why, but the simple answer is that, in particular, anime has a very large library and also a very large history, and that will drive, the much higher number. India's coming on, Spain, France, etc. So this is a big picture. We are in an area called peak Asia. Now, when we break this down into anime a little bit more specifically, you can see that anime drove roughly $5.5 billion of global streaming revenue in 2023. This is roughly 6% of the global total. The numbers don't change a whole lot from quarter to quarter. Again, this is probably due to the strength of the catalog. When you look at video revenue, is actually usually rather flat. New release can go up and down. But again, Japanese catalog in anime is very deep, and this is kind of why the number is a little bit flat. Anyway, 1.4 billion, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.4 across last year. When we look at this by streamer, probably not surprising, the biggest contributor to anime business around the world is Netflix, roughly $2.1 billion, followed by Crunchyroll, 1.1 billion, and then Hulu. This is U.S. Hulu. It's not doesn't include Japan Hulu at $1 billion. Some of the other bigger players: Amazon Prime Video, $500 million, IQ, Bilibili, Tencent, Disney, Max, and Mango. Anyway, these are some of the biggest streamers in the world, and these are the anime contribution to their revenue. Again, this is calculated, like I mentioned before, by this demand metric that Parrot has. Now, I did the math, so you don't have to. Just so you know, Netflix on this chart is 38% of the world's global streaming revenue. And if I remember correctly, Netflix global subscribers are roughly around 250 plus million around the world. So it is a big number. Now, speaking of secondary effects, I'll go into a little bit more detail later, but we also were asked to help out the AGA, Associated Japanese Animators, to come up with some anime merchandise number. So we worked with them, and we came up with an allocation by global streaming subscriber to come up with an anime merchandise figure. This figure in 2023 is $14.3 billion. So the two together anime streaming and merchandise are around a $20 billion business. This actually number is published in the AJA book. It came out last Friday. Just if you're interested, AJA is, I believe, having a seminar tomorrow afternoon. They will go into the detail of that report. But AJA came to Parrot this summer and said, we would like to come up with a more precise number, a more statistically valid number, consistent number to look at the size of the anime business. And this is the first time that Parrot and AJA have partnered together to come up with a number. So this is actually a pretty big deal. As everybody knows, the AJA book is basically the Bible of the anime numbers around the world. When we break these things down by region, North America streaming revenue was the highest in the world, $2.24 billion, followed by Asia at $1.6 billion. Once again, I did the math, so you don't have to. North America is roughly 7% of the world's population, with almost half of the world's streaming revenue, where Asia is 60% of the world's population with around 30% of the streaming revenue. So obviously there is a large road of opportunity in Asia for anime over the next 5 to 10 years. When we look at merchandising, actually Asia slips in just a little bit higher than North America at $5.5 billion, and North America comes in at $5 billion. Now, I've been here, I've talked for 10 minutes now, and we do have our wonderful guest, Tezuka-san. And we'd like to ask him for some comments on what we call anime's rise to the top.
はい、皆さんこんにちは、手塚誠と申します。今日はちょっと日本語で話させていただきますので、ちょっと通訳を入れさせていただきます。
Very nice to meet you, everyone. Please allow me to speak in Japanese. I have an interpreter today. Very nice to meet you, everyone.
はい、今ダグラスさんのから非常に興味深いデータが示されたと思いますけども。
And Douglas just shared with us interesting data to all of us.
私たちもいろいろなメディアを通して日本のアニメーションが非常に世界で人気があると、実際に非常にそれは興行に結びついているということは聞いております。
And we heard that Japanese anime are quite popular all over the world, so we are hearing a lot about that.
それがなぜかということを多分ダグラスさんはいろいろ研究されてるんだと思いますが。
And I think Douglas is looking into why Japanese anime is so popular all over the world.
正直申し上げて僕もそれがなぜなのかは分かりません。
And to be honest with you, I'm not sure why.
ただし日本でなぜこれほどアニメが人気があるのかということは少し説明ができます。
But I can give you a little bit of a hint on why it's so popular in Japan.
まず非常にシンプルに言いますと、アニメというのは日本の場合漫画というメディアと非常に密接に関係があります。
And anime here in Japan, and it has a really close relationship with the manga, the booklet part.
ほとんどのアニメーションは、全てではありませんけども、漫画の原作を持っています。この漫画を元にして作られたアニメーション、これが非常に人気があるということです。
So majority of animes are made out of the original story, which is written as a manga form.
ということは、つまりまずアニメの前に漫画という文化が日本では非常に強く根付いていたということです。
So meaning that we have established culture of reading manga, so that is why the manga is quite strong in Japan.
それはなぜか。
And why is that?
それは簡単に説明できます。
I can explain it quite easily.
日本には手塚治虫がいたからです。
Because we had Osamu Tezuka in Japan.
皆さん笑うと思いますが、でもこれは事実なんですね。日本の漫画、今のスタイルの漫画をスタートさせたのは手塚治虫です。
And you may laugh about it, but I think the person who originates this manga culture is Osamu Tezuka.
その漫画のパイオニアが自らテレビアニメというものを開拓しました。
And this pioneer of manga had the decision to go and to produce the anime version of manga.
ですから極端に言うと今の日本の漫画と日本のアニメーションを両方とも手塚治虫が始めたようなものです。